Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of The Guys Who Stare at Stats. Cade Kennedy with you alongside Tyler Riggs. And folks, week 7 has come and gone, and we are officially now over that halfway point of the college football season for most teams. What another fun week it was. So before we get into it, as always, feel free to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell to always be notified when new videos come out, and feel free to leave a comment down below and give us your takeaways from week 7 of the college football season. And I mean, Tyler, it was a week that really just about everything you wanted to see happened in terms of close games. We had a lot of down to the wire finishes. It was truly one of those great weeks of football.
Yeah, not a bad encore to the chaos that we saw last week, right? You didn't get the big upsets, but you came close, and a lot of teams got pushed to their limit and survived this week.
Absolutely. And we've got to go into it. Games of the week, starting with the big one. Anytime you have a top 3 matchup, it's going to be game of the week unless something absolutely just truly chaotic outshines it. That was not the case this week. It was Oregon getting a 32-31 win over Ohio State. And Tyler, I mean, this is one we went back and forth on the preview show where you felt that Dylan Gabriel was going to have another big game, and that's exactly what he did. 23 for 34, 341 through the air, 2 TDs, had a rushing TD as well. But it wasn't just Dylan Gabriel showing up. The entire Oregon offense showed up to play on Saturday night.
Yeah, and I'll say this, it really felt like a big time heavyweight matchup. I gotta give credit to both teams in that. But this is what we had started to see from Oregon the last couple weeks. Felt like their offense had found another gear, and had started to really kind of take that turn after a little bit of a wonky start to the season. And that's what showed here. They were able to move the ball seemingly at will for the most part and just uber efficient. And, as you start getting to this meat of the season, that's what you want to see in a contending team is an offense that really fears no one in terms of being able to say, okay, we're going to go out and do what we need to do. That's what Oregon did.
Absolutely. And this was one of those games that, I felt Ohio State going into it had a pretty good chance to win. I thought they'd come in here. I didn't think they'd, it'd be a ho-hum, take care of business kind of game. I don't think anyone expected that. And Ohio State absolutely had their moments, and we've got to talk about it, Tyler. Just the most frustrating 30 final seconds you could have to a game if you're Ohio State. I mean, you have Will Howard. Let's back it up before those 30 seconds. It all starts on, okay, 2-minute drill here. You've got about a minute 30 to go, and Will Howard just falls down. You only have one timeout left, and, he's trying to avoid a sack, and he just straight up falls down. That's kind of, mistake number 1. You get down the field, you get called for an offensive pass interference, and before that, Jeremiah Smith catches the ball, and he doesn't get down out of bounds. He gets down inbounds, so that means the clock's going to run after that. Ohio State either doesn't catch that or didn't want to waste the timeout to stop the clock there. But at that point, I felt like you just had to. You've got to find something to roll with. Either way, they get the bailout. Oregon has the 12 men on the field, so you have 6 seconds to go. And this kind of goes back to what we talked about in Tennessee, Arkansas as well. Just what in the world are you doing out there? You have 6 seconds left. I went back and watched it again before we started this. And Will Howard at 3 seconds, he makes the right decision. He realizes that, 3 seconds have already gone. I have to do something right now. Looks to his open receiver right by the sideline and just decides to tuck it and run it. And you literally run the game out, and Oregon gets the job done. I mean, it's just a crazy sequence of events that was the one thing I was concerned about with Ohio State going into this game. You knew they'd give up some points. That was expected. Can the offense show up when you absolutely have to make a play? It did most of the game, but when you really needed it, it wasn't there.
Yeah, and to a degree, I'm going to say that, if you're an Ohio State fan, you probably feel, hey, we should have won this game. And you're right. But I think the win was earned by Oregon just as much. It was a great fight in that sense. Both quarterbacks just played out their mind. And Will Howard, I don't know if I want to call it a choke, Cade,
Yeah.
but whether it's Ryan Day or Howard, whoever, you want to put that blame on with the offense, the ending sequences there, yeah, it's got to be a little bit better. because that's how you lose those close games. Do want to shout out Watermark61 who commented on our preview talking about um, Ohio State doesn't have a weak point, and for the most part, he was right. He was a little off on his Oregon take, but it turns out the weak point was maybe time management for Ohio State and situational awareness. So the good news is it's regular season, right? You have a chance. Most likely, these two, depending on what Penn State has to say about these two, can match up again in the Big Ten title game. So Ohio State has a chance of revenge. Maybe that motivate them the rest of the way.
Maybe. And I mean, it's crazy to think about it. We'll talk about it a little bit more in this video. The three undefeated teams in the Big Ten right now, as I scroll up, you'll be able to see it on the screen if you're watching this. It's Oregon, Penn State, and Indiana. That's just a
Yeah,
crazy
Indiana,
sentence to say.
Indiana, baby.
But, undefeated Indiana, we'll talk about them more. They play Nebraska this week. That's a preview video topic. But the other thing I want to talk about Oregon real quick, Dylan Gabriel mentioned it. Big game for him. He stepped up again. We'll talk about that a little bit on. He might be in that Heisman conversation. And I say that might as in, even the most Dylan Gabriel doubter, if that's a type of person that exists in this world, I think you've got to put him in that Heisman conversation. Now, also Evan Stewart, want to credit him, 7 catches, 149, and a TD. And also the crowd, just Autzen Stadium hitting
Oh, delivered big time.
129
Yeah,
decibels. When
yeah.
you hit over 120, that's a jet plane taking off. So I mean, you are at like the highest almost level of threshold a human being can make. And I mean, we always talk about that's a scary place to play it, and that's why when Oregon gets a big game like that, you know it's going to be a tough environment, and you cannot back down from them. Ohio State didn't, but when Oregon's really good like this, Dan Lanning, phenomenal coach, he always wants to play aggressive, gets Oregon in positions to win. They capitalized on it. Massive win for the Ducks. And that will bring us to another game that kind of felt the same way, Tyler. We disagreed on it. You like the home team, I like the road team. I was thinking we'd get a split. I was thinking, you know what? Oregon got one. I'm going to get Ole Miss here. They're surely going to hold on to a 23-16 lead in a game where their defense has played pretty solid for the most part. And LSU said otherwise. 2 big 4th down conversions. Garrett Nussmeier making some amazing throws. And I think for the first time all year, I've been hard on LSU a lot for what they've done defensively. And to their credit, they stepped up. They forced some turnovers. LSU's offense had to get going in moments, and they were able to in key clutch situations. LSU finally showed, I think, what they are capable of this year in a big win, 29-26 in overtime in the Magnolia Bowl over Ole Miss.
It sounds like you took a long-winded way of saying that I was right. Take those home underdogs. I should have popped down some money on that. I would have made a little bit of cash. But this was a game. So compared to the Oregon Ohio State game, that one felt like high-level football. Everybody executing pretty much on the upteenth level, and especially when it comes to the offensive side. This one a little bit uglier. A bit more of a rock fight at times. Slow first quarter, and then it kind of had that good second quarter where they were trading blows and then really slowed down again, in the second half. But yeah, this is kind of what I expected. LSU wins these types of games. Say what you want about Brian Kelly, and I'm not sure if I'm super high on him as, one of the best coaches in the country. Some people already get that. But he knows how to win these type of games where it's a little ugly at times, but he gets his players to make those big time plays. Kyron Lacy, big time, a couple of moments in this one. Aaron Anderson, Garrett Nussmeier, credit to him, wasn't perfect, in this game for sure, but was able to find those moments in a game where Ole Miss did a really good job of shutting down any sort of threat from the LSU ground game. So that makes it, really tough on your offense when you are that one dimensional, but you still found a way to pull it out if you're LSU.
Absolutely. And that was kind of my thought with it, too. You mentioned the ugliness to it. And I mean, you can look up here Jackson Dart, 24 for 40 to 284, a TD and a pick. Nussmeier, 22 for 51. That was my kind of reaction watching it live, on the way back from OU, Texas, keeping an eye on it was, okay, the uglier this thing gets, the more likely it is LSU's going to find a way to hold on and win. Even though they were never in front, like you mentioned, these are the type of games they like to win. They showed the stat under Brian Kelly. LSU at night in Death Valley, undefeated. These types of games they really thrive in. And even though LSU never really seemed to find that big rhythm to get into, they didn't have to at the end. Ole Miss was just as disjointed at times, if I can, get my sentences flowing here. But LSU able to hold on, massive win for them to stay 5-1. And LSU 2-0 in SEC play. They are just as alive as anybody else.
Yeah, and the other big takeaway, the final one I have from this is that when LSU, decides to be aggressive, you look at this game, 6 sacks, Cade, 6 sacks. That's gonna really disrupt any offense. And when they decide, hey, you know what, we're not gonna care, we're gonna be aggressive. A lot of times that's when they've been at their best. So I wonder how they'll try to keep that going in the coming weeks with some big games ahead.
Absolutely. And also credit to LSU secondary. They were a plus 50 in what they gave up against Ole Miss versus what they usually had been giving up in terms of the passing game, giving up usually over 325, around 330, 335. When you hold Ole Miss to 284 and you put pressure on a high-powered offense like that, you get them sputtering, you've got as good a chance as anybody. And that is exactly what happened there. But we've got another one to move on to, Tyler, because we had almost upset. We had upset alert. We had upset alert for a long time out at the Coliseum, and USC looked not to be in 100% control of the game, but a pretty darn good shot at pulling this off. 17-3, USC winning the first 20 minutes of the game, the first third, if you will. Trojans just had to do something that a Lincoln Riley team can't do. Protect the lead. Don't make mistakes. Don't let Penn State get any sort of momentum. And then they immediately gave all momentum back to Penn State, and the offense started clicking for the Nittany Lions. The one thing you couldn't do if you're USC is the one thing that happened. Penn State, despite a horrible first half offensively, able to just grind their way back into it. Tyler Warren, I mean, you would talk about insane for a tight end. 17 catches for 224 and a touchdown. I mean, just every time it was somewhere near him, he seemed to come up with a catch. I mean, it was just incredible to see that happen. Just going back and looking at it, Penn State had the 3 turnovers. One of those was a pick, a Hail Mary right at the end, just trying to make a play there. Drew Aller had made some mistakes, but he was able to correct as the game went on. Penn State was dead to right and then came back and was able to knock down USC.
Yeah, don't let the box score fool you when you see those 3 picks from Drew Aller. I thought overall, had a lot of big time moments. We talked at length multiple times early in the season that, hey, Penn State's going to go as far as Drew Aller can take him because they've got everything else. And on a day where their ground game really didn't get going, USC, give them credit for that, able to kind of slow it down. Part of that was obviously Penn State trailing, but it just wasn't there. I mean, their longest run of the day was 19 yards and it was Aller. So tells you there wasn't much balance there. And it felt like that, but Aller came up big, especially in that second half. And goodness, that connection between him and Tyler Warren was something to behold. Like you said, a lot of fun to watch them too. And man, if you're a USC fan, this is a gut punch. You've had some games so far this year. You think to the Michigan game, you think to Minnesota last week, where it's like, how do we not, find a way to close some of these out? And this was not a game where necessarily USC got bullied, but I think it showed that they just have not been able to put together seemingly 4 quarters of great football in these bigger games. Other than the start of the season where they were able to get that win over LSU, you see that game, and then you look fast forward a couple weeks, and you're like, guys, what has gone wrong? Where's that team that was able to close it out over LSU?
Yeah, and it's interesting that point you make about, still trying to adjust to the physicality of the Big Ten and things like that. We talked about it last week with Minnesota. You got bullied. That's exactly what happened here. And I think USC made a statement that we're not going to get bullied today. Penn State only averaged 3.8 yards per carry. You can see that on the screen here. Stats, Katron Allen, 16 carries for 56 yards. Nick Singleton only had 26 yards on 10 touches. But at the end of the day, it didn't matter because Penn State was able to beat them in the air. When they had to switch the game plan, Andy Kotelnicki, great offensive mind, just able to say, okay, this is going to be the Tyler Warren show. We're just going to throw it to him and see what happens. and it worked pretty well, darn well. Penn State's offense struggling at times, like we mentioned, but when they had to hold on and force the big play, they were able to do it, had the big conversion to even get this thing tied up at 30. And then USC, I mean, once this thing got to overtime, you start to get the feeling that, okay, the Trojans have given up a lot of momentum, a lot of ground. What's going to be that death blow to them? And it's a missed field goal in overtime that allows Penn State to just get down, kick it, and get out of there with that 33-30 win.
Ooh, Lincoln Riley hot seat. Maybe discussion for a different day.
Maybe, but I mean, you're 5-8 in your last 13 if you're Riley. I mean, this is turning more and more into the Clay Helton record. Not saying they're the exact same situation, obviously, except for record-wise, Lincoln Riley is a little worse, which is incredibly odd to say, but it's true. It's just I don't know what the future holds at USC, and that's a weird statement to say after 2 years ago they looked like they were going to be back on top of the college football world in some capacity with the 12-team playoff on the horizon, but now you're sputtering at 3-3, you're 1-3 in conference play. It's weird saying it, but where USC goes from here is going to be an interesting story for the second half of the season. But we've got to move back on to SEC country, Tyler, because we talked about this in the preview, that there was an upset advisory that I issued in Tuscaloosa for this game, Alabama versus South Carolina. I think it was more of a, what in the world is the story going to be if this is a tough, gritty 4-quarter game that Alabama has to hold on to for dear life? And it was worse than I could have imagined for Alabama, because I'm going into this thinking, okay, Alabama scores, first drive out of the gate, there's the dominance you want to see from them. Defense is playing well. It's 14-0, and then South Carolina scores on a nice play on fourth down when they have to, 14-7. And then Tyler, I mean, you could look at the scoring summary here. South Carolina just gets a nice shot of momentum from a safety. I mean, it's right after one play. It's the intentional grounding on Jalen Milroe that gives South Carolina 2 more points, 14-9. Okay, well, Alabama needs to respond now. Instead, it's an interception going the other way. South Carolina gets a field goal out of it. 2 big mistakes. You can live with 14-7, 14-12, and you start feeling uncomfortable. You get even more uncomfortable because South Carolina gets the ball to start the second half. They have all momentum. Everything is riding their way. And then you add an 8-minute, 40-second drive just grinding it out on Bama now. 16 plays. South Carolina scores. They have the lead. Alabama turns it over on a pick in the end zone to start the fourth quarter. And you start to believe this. Here we go again. Alabama can't hold on to a double-digit lead. This is like Georgia. This is like Vanderbilt. The defense is starting to give things up. The offense hasn't had traction. Now they don't have rhythm at all. What's Alabama going to do here? And Alabama, to their credit, able to correct the situation a bit, get a few touchdowns. Okay, we're up 8. Start to put yourself away here. South Carolina comes right back down the field, scores, goes for 2, doesn't get it. You've just got to recover an onside kick, and then that doesn't go Alabama's way. South Carolina gets the miracle grasp, having to go a little under half the field, and Alabama able to force the 4th turnover of the game for the Crimson Tide. And for Alabama, I mean, this is headache city now. This is 3 games in a row where you've shown you're the better team, but you're 2-1 in that stretch, and you think about it, a few plays bounce the other team's way. This is 3 straight losses for them. Obviously, we don't play the games in the ifs and stuff like that, but this absolutely head-scratching performance again for Alabama.
Yeah, I don't think this quells any of the concern in Tuscaloosa this week. Might have to listen to the Five Bomb Show, see if there's another legend call in. And Jalen Milroe was uncomfortable all day long, even when Bama was up 14-0. You kind of mentioned it. It kind of felt like, okay, they're starting to pull away here, despite a little bit of a slow start. And credit to South Carolina, knowing, hey, you know what, this Alabama team's real, and we can't give up. And I don't know what the answer right now is to the Alabama defense. It just doesn't seem like the edge is there right now. And I don't know if that's, the changes with Coach DeBoer coming in or what it is, or maybe that group's just not confident in what they're doing. But okay, there's some serious problems on that defensive side. They've been shockingly average at times, some that we just don't usually associate with an Alabama defense. And then Milrow, you know, it's tough because feels like at times, okay, this is a guy that you believe could beat anybody with his talents, whether it be with his feet or his arm. But he's had some odd moments this season where it feels like almost that he's forcing it. Maybe the pressure's getting to him. I'm not sure, but South Carolina's front seven. We knew that if you were going to look at it and say, okay, what's South Carolina's way into this game? It was going to be their front seven, right? Very talented along that defensive line, and for the most part, they did what they needed to do to be able to give the Gamecocks a chance to win it. And I mean, it's easier to criticize if you're Alabama from a win. That's the good news. You did drop it, so now you regroup again and see how you can maybe get some of that swagger back. It feels like the Tide just they don't have the swagger right now. You better get it because you've got a good game coming up against Tennessee this weekend.
Absolutely. And this was one that, the feeling around the Cotton Bowl, if you will, kind of, just before this game, the way I was looking at it, kind of the glimpses I could get of Alabama, South Carolina. The gut feeling was, okay, Alabama's going to put this thing away. What do you do? I mean, this is kind of, football 101 almost. The one thing you cannot do is give the other team life. And I think everyone knows that, but that's exactly what Alabama did. If you're Jalen Milrow, I get you're in a situation where you have no receivers, you're running backwards, you've got to get rid of this thing. You've just got to run yourself out of the end zone. You know you've got to at least get outside of the end zone before you chuck that thing away. Like it's mental mistakes for Alabama sometimes, and I think it's just this weird trying to play too perfect, especially now knowing you have that loss already to Vanderbilt. I don't know if maybe there's going to be an overcorrection we're starting to see now from Alabama. And I would lean more towards that theory if we hadn't seen this against Georgia in the second half. But I don't know what in the world has gotten into Alabama these past few weeks, but it is just weird to see them playing ugly ball for 3 straight games.
I bet it's just a team that, for whatever reason, doesn't seem like they're confident, right? We've seen in the past under Saban, Alabama team, despite whatever mistakes, just always had that feeling of saying, all right, you know what, we are the better team. We're going to show it. It feels over the last couple of weeks, for whatever reason, that edge just kind of left the Crimson Tide. So how can you find that again? That's what I'm looking at going forward for Alabama.
Yeah, and we're going to have to ask the same question, though. You mentioned Alabama playing Tennessee this Saturday. We've got to talk about Tennessee, too, because, I mean, it's the same boat for them. The Vols get a 23-17 win in overtime over Florida. Granted, this is one of those games that anything can happen in it. Florida consistently has been better than Tennessee in these games, even when Tennessee has looked like the better program or had the better season. No matter what, Florida always seems to be competitive in this game, and Florida got up for it again. It's what a head scratching first half. This game is 3-0 at halftime. I don't think anyone was expecting that. Tennessee's offense is completely just evaporated in key moments over the past few weeks. Then Florida goes up 10-0. Graham Mertz is putting an amazing drive together with some, look at his numbers 11 for 15, 125, and a touchdown. That doesn't really wow you, but it doesn't need to. Florida just needed to play consistent, and then Mertz gets hurt, and then Florida's got to switch quarterbacks around. You get Lagway in, and he does an okay job being thrust into that situation. Tennessee offense comes to life. They take the lead. But Florida, in a 2-minute drill where you have to have it, the Gators responded. And this was a scary moment for Tennessee because you start to think, oh no, it's happening again. We're going to overtime with a Florida team we know we're better than. We already lost to Arkansas. This team is starting to run on fumes, it feels like a little bit. Even when you were getting people back from injury this week, just where is this season going for Tennessee? But the Vols are able to get a stop. Sampson's able to punch it in from 1 yard out, and Tennessee holds on for dear life. They weren't able to do it last week, but they were able to make enough adjustments, it feels like, from game to game to hold on for this week.
Yeah, but boy, Tennessee is skirting awfully close to fraud alerts, right? You've had 3 straight weeks in SEC play after dominating your non-conference games offensively. I don't know if Oklahoma just kind of showed the blueprint of how to slow down the hyper attack, or maybe Nico's not playing with as much confidence. That's he's kind of struggled to touch. So what's going on with that offense? Because that's as far Tennessee will only go as far as their offense will take. Their defense, it's kind of if you're a Tennessee fan, welcome to kind of how Oklahoma's feeling. Maybe not quite as gross levels, but you feel like, hey, this is the best defense we've had in years, if not a decade. And your offense is just sputtering, and you've got to really get that figured out. Especially with the Tide coming to town Saturday, you want to be able. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be, putting up 71 like you did against Kent State or 51 against Mississippi State. But you want to see some more life to it than what's been over the last 3 weeks. Um, the big thing for them and what keeps saving them, and credit to him on this is, man, Dylan Sampson. He's had a really good start to the season. He's already at 15 touchdowns on the year, tick under 700 yards. He's been the reason that you've been able to pull out some of these tight games because when your passing game is not quite where you want it to be consistently, Dylan Sampson has been the answer, and he's gone over 100 yards in all games except for that OU game, was 8 yards short there. So credit to him on that, and that Tennessee offensive line for at least showing that, hey, when it matters, we could run the ball. That's been important, and that's a reason why they are at least 5-1 right now and avoided some of those upsets, I think.
Yeah, and you talk about the blueprint for this of how to beat a kind of more up tempo offense like Tennessee likes to be. And I mean, you look at time of possession, and I think that's one of the key things. Florida wins time of possession 35-25. It's off by 4 seconds, but close enough. 35-25 for Florida. Tennessee had multiple turnovers in this game. Florida did too, and I think that's what really helped Tennessee here. You were even in the turnover margin of two apiece. But, we've talked about what's the anatomy, what's the key to an upset here. Able to control the time of possession and able to force turnovers. Florida was able to do both of those things. And even though, they've had the quarterback changes all year, they've been kind of used to that system. It didn't bug them as much when they've had to switch around. Florida was able to hold on, be motivated enough for this game. And the Gators came in. They had a good game plan. They were able to shut Tennessee down, but you've got to be able to shut them down for 4 quarters. If you can't do that, Tennessee will still find a way to win, especially at home. But Tyler, it is time to go to. We've renamed this. We've talked about what we want to actually call this segment. I think we've come up with a good name for it. This is no longer winners and losers. This is now champions of life / fraud alert. So we are either talking about a champion here, and my pick for champions of life for this week has got to be Oregon, beating Ohio State 32-31. The Ducks played a phenomenal game. We already talked about it a little bit. Dylan Gabriel, cannot put enough praise on him for how he was able to play in this game. Even though he didn't have the super accurate numbers, he didn't have the 80+% completion percentage. You're never going to have that against a team like Ohio State. If you do, you might actually be running 1 yard pass routes the entire game. That's about the only way I think you're going to do that. Jordan James, credit to him. Look at that, 23 carries for 115 and a touchdown. Already talked about Evan Stewart having a big performance a little bit. Oregon's crowd showed up in a massive way. Everything that had to go Oregon's way did in a massive welcome to the Big Ten game for Oregon. Dan Lanning, cannot put enough praise on that guy for how he continues to always seem to put Oregon in big positions here, just riding the ship as he's continued to do for the past few years. His aggressive style of coaching, I really enjoy it, Tyler. I don't know if you're the biggest fan of it, but I always enjoy the kind of, hey, we'll go for two if we have to. We'll run an onside kick because the penalty allows us to kick from the 50-yard line. We'll be as aggressive as we want to be because you never know when that's going to break for you.
Yeah, it's good till you start losing games, but Landon's been able to win games. So for now, he gets off the hook on that with some of those calls. But yeah, I mean, I can completely see, why you go with this way with Oregon. That's a massive statement, and one to show that, okay, hey, we are that team of the new crop to the Big Ten that is legit. You got to fear us, and taking down the establishment of Ohio State. That is definitely something that's a big notch in the belt midway through the season.
Absolutely. So, Tyler, who do you have for your pick of champions of life of the week?
Staying in the Big Ten, I'm going with the Penn State Nittany Lions. You say, probably should have been an overtime of that game, kind of a head scratcher. Why do you go there? Because, hey, when you're not playing your best ball and your team that's wanting to show that, all right, we are title contenders, I'd argue Penn State did a good job of that this week. Knowing it wasn't their best game all around, they found a way to go get the win, and that's what, teams that at the end of the season want to be there do. We've seen other squads, Alabama, Georgia, trip up in that way, right? Tennessee. So, to Penn State's credit, they did not fall victim to that. Came close. That's a long road trip, and were able to survive it. So I think they deserve some credit for that. And yeah, the Nittany Lions, at least for another week, I think, under James Franklin, not in the fraud category yet. They skirt around it, and we'll see how long it lasts. It's about usually where the Penn State season starts to turn. So they've got some opportunities in the coming weeks to prove that they're not the Penn State of previous years.
Absolutely. And I think the way I was thinking about Penn State earlier is they're almost like a cockroach in a way. They are, unless someone
I,
absolutely flattens them with their own boot, nothing is going to kill Penn State. They will find a way to survive just about everything unless you physically manhandle them enough, like we've seen Michigan and Ohio State be able to do the past few years. Obviously, with this year's Michigan team, I don't know if they'd be able to do that. But unless someone is able to physically put their foot down on them, you're not going to be able to find a way to stop Penn State, at least from finding a way out of that situation. But Tyler, we've got to get to fraud alert. And you never like to put your own team on fraud
oh,
alert, but I've got to stay in the
oh
state of
no.
Oklahoma because we got to talk about Red River rivalry. Texas 34-3 just smashing Oklahoma. And I mean, this was the best first quarter I could have imagined for Oklahoma, considering the offensive situation. But then, unfortunately, there were 3 quarters of the game that had to be played after that. We could not just call the game after 15 minutes, no matter how badly I actually wanted that to happen. This is an Oklahoma offense that is beyond terrible. I mean, words cannot fully describe how dysfunctional this unit is. And you could say, yes, well, doesn't Oklahoma have 5 starting wide receivers out? They do. But what is this Oklahoma team's identity on offense? Can they go to the run game then to maybe help ail that? No. Can their offensive line block? No. Can their tight ends do anything? Not really. Can their quarterbacks do anything? Not really. Again, you've already switched to Michael Hawkins, and I thought he played fine given what he was told to do. Because this is what bugs me, Tyler. You had 2 weeks to prepare for this game if you're Oklahoma. You had the bye week and you're riding off the high of the big win at Auburn. Your defense was able to step up in that one. Your offense did just enough to get something done, enough to where your defense could help you and get the defensive score to win this, to put that game away. And Oklahoma just looked like a team that they were able to hold on as long as possible. But when the dam finally broke late in the second quarter, Texas is able to recover their own fumble in the end zone for a touchdown. Oklahoma has fumble and another fumble, and they're lucky that Texas didn't make it 28-3 at halftime. They really are. The defense was able to get another stand in the third quarter, and then Texas was able to kick a field goal later. This is a game that felt over after it was 14-3. And I don't know how many Oklahoma games I've watched, not counting this year, when I've been able to look at the game in the second quarter, see that Oklahoma's down 14-3 and go, yeah, this one's over. Unless a miracle happens, we're not coming back in this thing. I mean, it is just pitiful to watch for Oklahoma. It is one of the worst offenses in Oklahoma history that I can think of. The worst offense since I've been alive, to say the absolute least. But I mean, this is talking about 1998 level standards, and we're going back to John Blake era here. It's not a good look for Oklahoma, not a bad look for Oklahoma, but an absolutely devastatingly horrible look for Oklahoma.
Okay, here's where I've been thinking all this too. Let me talk the Sooner fans off the edge a little bit here because I want to pose some of these questions. Tell me what offensive coordinator in the country that you could go to and say, hey, you're going against the number one team in the country. You're starting a true freshman quarterback. You're missing your top five, not one, not two, not three, top five receiving options. You still don't have 100% offensive line. And quite frankly, this atmosphere is going to be the biggest you're going to play in arguably all season long. Tell me what offensive coordinator in the country would be able to produce a win out of that. Because
Yeah,
if,
I
if
don't
there's
think.
one out there, then we need to hire him right now.
Yeah,
Like you need to push for him, and that's kind of where I'm at on this. With and don't get me wrong, there's some issues. I get it. It's not perfect. You can blame. I like your point about hey, you had 2 weeks to prepare. This should have been better in terms
yeah,
of your attack, your plan of attack. I agree with that 100%, but you're still very limited. So I, I would say to all the OU fans that are like fire everybody, let's get a Dick Anderson and a Deion Burks at the same time healthy, and then see where this offense is at. If it still looks as pitiful as can be with your at least two top options back at receiver, then yeah, okay, maybe it is time to clean house. And it's teetering that way. Don't get me
yeah.
wrong. I also want to give credit to Texas because they played like the number one team in the country.
They did.
That's
They
what kind of
absolutely did.
the opportunity was there. Quinn Ewers had a little bit of a slow start, but he found his rhythm. The run game was vicious, and that's amazing considering preseason you start losing running backs. They drop like flies, and everybody's going, "Oh, hold on a minute, Texas might have a problem," and they've quelled all that. So yeah, I can't quite get to the fraud allegations yet with OU, just because I think people got to realize the bar is set. I think in an unfair standard.
Yeah,
And
and
every fan base does it. Ohio State, Oregon, Texas, whoever. They'll tell you, well, hey, we should always be competing for a national title. Some years it's just not your year. And I think so far, I mean, Kate, be realistic with me. If I would have told you preseason, hey, you're going to come out of the Texas game 4-2 on the season. You lost to Tennessee and Texas. Would you be surprised? Would you be disappointed? Probably, but would you honestly be totally surprised by that?
no, and I think even if you go back and watch our preseason kind of predictions video, I think we both expected OU to be 4-2 at this point in the season. I think we both kind of expected, Oklahoma could be a 7 or 8 win team, but I think it's not. For me, it's not that Oklahoma lost this game because we both thought Oklahoma had at best the ability to maybe cover inside when it was 14. Then it got pushed up to 16, 17. Some people were even reporting it might even get up to 18 before the game started. I think my main issue lies with not just this game, because you expect Texas to come out and play dominant. It's a rivalry game, for goodness sake. If you don't expect Texas is going to do everything in their ability to stomp Oklahoma, you're crazy. You're kidding yourself. I think for me, it's that number 3. You couldn't get more than 3 points. When you had the ball at midfield twice in the first quarter, you took one deep shot it was the third play of the game, and you never looked downfield again. You never try. And J.J. Hester was open. To his credit, he was open. It was just a slightly overthrown ball by Hawkins. What kills me, Tyler, is when you look at this. I pulled this up because this was a game that was not competitive once Texas got up 21-3. And some of that is Texas's defense. Like you said, I don't want to turn this into, Texas isn't good. They're the number one team in the country. They're absolutely good. They're great. They're not good. They're great. But Oklahoma has only had 13 plays in 6 games now that have gone 20 yards or more this season. They have been outscored 44-0 in the second quarter of all 3 SEC games they've played. And this might be the most damning one of all the stats. Tyler, this is the 6th game of the season for Oklahoma. You want to know how many touchdowns Oklahoma has scored in the third quarter of all games this year?
How many?
They've scored 0. They've scored
Oof.
9 points in
Oof.
all third quarters. They didn't score against Texas. They scored 3 against Auburn, nothing against Tennessee, 3 against Temple, and 3 against Tulane. How are you supposed to win any game if you can't score in the second quarter or the third quarter in conference play? How are you supposed to win any game? The defense, I thought they played fine. You can look at that and say you gave up 34. Yeah, and 3 of those were short field drives where you just had to pray and hold on and hope that Texas made a devastating mistake, which they didn't do because that's what a great team does. They don't make big mistakes. Their biggest mistake was maybe missing a field goal twice before halftime and getting stood up on a 4th and 2. That was their two mistakes of the game besides the interception on the first drive, which Oklahoma responded by missing a field goal because of course that happened. That's what you kind of expect from Oklahoma's offense this year. OU ranks 105th in the nation in offensive efficiency. Florida State and North Carolina State are the only two teams I think behind them that are Power 4 teams. I take that back. Houston's Power 4. So make that 3. Oklahoma just looks absolutely brutal on offense at times. And I'm with you. This is not a fire everybody on the offensive side of the ball rant. This is not fire Brent Venables. I don't want to see Seth Luttrell next year. I really don't want to see him, and I really don't want to see Joe John Finley either. Those are your two co-offensive coordinators. The tight end position hasn't really shown you a whole lot this year. They can catch the ball kind of sometimes. They can't really block. You got to do both of those to be a tight end. I'm sorry. It's just that's where my main issue lies. And as much as I like to say fire Seth Luttrell, 1 second ago after I say it, that's not going to fix anything this year. You're just going to have to sit and suffer and watch it if you're an Oklahoma fan. And I hate saying that because I am an Oklahoma fan. I'm going to have to sit and watch this for 6 more games, maybe 7 if we can win 2 more games. Because this South Carolina game, we'll talk about it a little bit more when we do our preview show, but that might determine if OU makes a bowl or not.
Yeah, no, that's very true. And I think you hit on some key points there. And the biggest ones, we mentioned Dan Lanning. You love his approach. They mentioned this during the Ohio State Oregon game. Dan Lanning puts a focus on that, what he calls the magic 8, right? The final 4 minutes of the second quarter, first 4 minutes of the third quarter, because he understands that closing that second quarter, starting that third quarter strong can be the difference in winning or losing the game. So to your point about OU, really being just god awful in the second and third quarter so far this season, that's an underrated aspect, right? Because that's problems too. Okay, you're not closing on trying to execute down the stretch in key moments, which would be the end of the second quarter, and you're not coming out of the locker room very strong. So you're not making maybe the proper adjustments that you need to. And I can understand where OU fans as a whole are on the offensive staff and why they're so hard on them. My only point is, yes, the seat should be warm. When it comes to Luttrell, when it comes to Joe John Finley, let's at least see what they got once you get a little healthier. I think that's when you can really make that full determination of, okay, now you need to clean house, or hey, it starts to look a bit better. They start to be more consistent. Maybe you give them a little bit more grace. But it's a thin line. I completely agree with that. You've got to get turned around quick. You cannot afford to be lackadaisical in those decisions when you're in the SEC, especially when you're new to the SEC and you're trying to establish that, yes, we are the brand that we've hyped ourselves up to be.
Absolutely. And so Tyler, I'm gonna quit ranting for now because like I've said before, this could be a whole nother 20 minets of yelling into the void.
Oh yeah.
Instead, I'm gonna turn it over to your fraudulent team of the week.
Oh, let's look no further than the fraud tall Utes, and more specifically Scam Rising. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. You go on the road against Arizona State. Cam's finally back, and he can't even throw off his back foot. He's still not 100%. So this goes down to Kyle Winningham, who's, well, stretch considered a
Well, we seem to have lost you for a
highly
moment.
touted
There
coach
we
in the
go.
country. But what I'm not saying. Okay, where was I at? Anyways,
You were good. You're good. We're
this
back.
also falls on the head of Kyle Whittingham, because he's a highly respected coach, and it's clear early in that game that Cam Rising is not in a spot where he should be playing. I mean, the dude was god awful in the first half. Every throw was coming to the waist of his receivers or targets, and it wasn't good enough. I mean, from that moment, Utah fans had to feel like, okay, we've got to pull the trigger. Not that Isaac Wilson, I get it, true freshman, has been great. I understand that. Hasn't been able to take care of the ball, but you got to do something, because it's clear that Cam Rising was not going to win you that game. And Utah battled. I mean, we know the one thing that Utah is going to be able to do offensively, seemingly no matter what, is run the ball, and they did. Micah Bernard had a really good game, but Arizona State could do that too. Cam Scatterbo, baby. Oh, okay, we love us some Cam Scatterbo, don't we?
Yes, we
That
do.
man, in his usual fashion, took over the game, and Arizona State picks up the big win. But Utah, my goodness, if you're a fan of the Utes, you got to be feeling pretty rough about your season right now. This was supposed to be your okay. We proved you were legit in the Pac-12. Now we're going to take over a conference. This is our opportunity, and boy, has it gone sideways. The fraud tell you it's not getting it done so far this season, kid.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm just showing the team stats here for you to show that Utah technically had more yards than Arizona State. Arizona State was kneeing it out at the end. That's why that ends up happening there. But the 3 turnovers, and they were 3 Cam Rising interceptions. Like you mentioned it,
Yeah,
you could tell early on in that game, Cam Rising, the body was there, but Cam Rising, the player, was not there. He could not make the throws that Arizona State was going to require him to make throughout that game. I get why they wanted him back. You want him to have him out there because you feel like you have a better shot. But if this is the Cam Rising that, we kept hearing was a game time decision for 3 games in a row, there was no business putting him out here. Yeah, and you might have actually had a better shot with Isaac Wilson simply because I don't know if Isaac Wilson throws 3 interceptions. Simply because of
it,
that basic fact
hey,
there.
he might have, but you at least knew he could at least power the ball down the field. And that's what was absent. Utah tried to take some shots. They really did. And Rising at times looked like he could maybe get it downfield, but everything was even low right when he got it downfield. So you just there was no way to utilize your best weapons. There just wasn't. So, uh, boy, where do you go from if you're Utah from here? Obviously, don't know if you saw this one, Cade. They did announce it. That Cam's out indefinitely. It was
Yes, I did
announced
see that.
yesterday. So it seems like they're kind of throwing in the towel and saying, "Okay, now we just got to try to build towards the future." And the good news is, if there's any for Utah, despite being frauds, is that you get 2 games that are not the hardest in the world. You got TCU at home, then you go to Houston, so you're taking on some more struggling teams, if you will, a chance to get right before you get to that BYU game. That's the one you circle. And as crazy as the Big 12's been this season, I know you got 3 undefeateds at the top, and BYU, Iowa State, Texas Tech. I would say that anything could still happen in this conference. So I'll offer that little silver lining for Utah and miss the week of frauds here. That is the Utah Utes.
Well, see, I'll take it the other way. I'll say it is the Big 12. You and I know from experience, any team can turn into the greatest team in the Big 12 for 1 week out of absolutely nowhere. Even Houston and TCU are capable of it. You never know when that's going to strike. I'm not saying Utah's going to lose either of those games. I'm just saying with Cam Rising going 16 for 37, he had a QBR of 29. Like this was not a fun day. Utah was able to get 4.2 yards per carry. Micah Bernard, like you mentioned, he had a good game. This is about the only real positive you can think of when it comes to Utah's offense. Defense held on as long as they could, but Cam Scatterbo just sometimes he decides he's going
Oh,
to
he'll wear
defy
you down.
gravity and stay on his feet when everything else is telling you no, the force of everything else is pushing you down. He keeps running. That's just what he does. 22 carries for 158 and 2 touchdowns. I mean, just my goodness. This was a game we both called, though. We both called that Arizona State was probably going to win this thing. We had that as the upset watch. That was the first game we had on there. I mean, my goodness, just a crazy, crazy game on a Friday night. Every Friday night's been crazy this week. Have you noticed that? Every Friday has a weird game. This happened to be one of them. My goodness, just what an adventure for fraudulent teams of the week, might possibly of the year. If Utah and Oklahoma played each other, I would maybe set the over under at 15. Like that's how bad we are right now, Tyler. That's how bad.
Jeez.
Red Iowa meets Red Iowa for the worst offensive performance of the decade. Someone might win that game 3-0. But we've got to get off this before I make too many Red Iowa memes for everybody to handle, because now it's time to finally get to power rankings, the top 5 teams in the Power 4, and then we'll do the top 3 teams in the group of 5. And Tyler, I mean, things have switched around for me at least a little bit. But Texas stays number one, dominant performance over Oklahoma. They did exactly what they're supposed to do in that game. They did trail for the first time all year. Am I really going to put that against them? No. They were one of three teams to not have that. Once again, their only weird blemish still is that first quarter of against Oklahoma where you had 13 total yards. But Oklahoma's a solid defense. Everyone knew that. You had that weird first half against Mississippi State. I'm just reiterating talking points from weeks ago at this rate. Texas, still number one in my book. Oregon, number two. You beat Ohio State. You looked impressive. That's the Oregon team I kept expecting to see a solid 4 quarters of football and more than that. Great performances by key players. Oregon deserves to be number two, and they might get closer to number one depending on how next week shakes out. At number three, I've got Penn State. They showed a lot of grit against USC, even when that offense sputtered in the first half. The defense was able to clamp down. The offense came back to life. Penn State was able to win, and that's really all you need to do. Just keep winning, and you're going to keep going up in these rankings. Number four, I've got a tie. I've got Ohio State and Georgia. I think they're both the best one-loss teams in the country. I would put Ohio State over Georgia right now if I had to split them, simply because Georgia kind of left the door open a little bit against Mississippi State. I don't know what it is about teams in Mississippi State this year. Texas did this. Now Georgia's done it. Only won by 10. It was a game Georgia was up big in early third quarter. But dogs hang on to beat the other dogs, red dogs over maroon dogs, 41-31. And that is where I've got the top five for the Power Four.
Okay, so as far as agreement here, I think 1 through 4. I don't have the tie. I've just got Texas, Oregon, Penn State, Ohio State 1 through 4 there for all the reasons you said. Number 5, last week I went with Miami because I said, hey, look, somebody's got to get one of those top 4 buys, right? We
Yeah.
know that out of the gaggle of Oregon, Penn State, Ohio State, 2 of those teams aren't going to survive that. I'm going to go with Iowa State, and we might get to it in best of the rest. We'll see, but that was kind of we talked about on the preview. That was a game where a bit of a trap for Iowa State. Could they survive it? West Virginia, not a great team, but as we know, always a tough place to play, and especially when they're not good, that can be a little bit of a tough game to get up for. Iowa State fell behind early in that first quarter, but they were able to recover in the second. And then from that point on, once they took that 14-7 lead, it was okay. Now we're going to establish our dominance, and we're able to go on a run of to put that away essentially. West Virginia got a late touchdown, made that score appear a little closer than what it actually was. So give me Iowa State in number 5. I think LSU, if I had to rank at 6, was probably right there too, because I do believe that was a big win against Ole Miss. That was a big test. And for the reasons that you mentioned, of you scratch your head with Georgia a bit, and then of course Bama we covered. I can't quite put them in that top picks just because of what we've seen, over the last couple weeks. So, yeah, like Iowa State at number 5. That's the only change I would have, and I think LSU's peaking. They're peaking, Cade. They're right on the outside looking in.
I agree with you. The good news about that Georgia debate, we'll see what they do this week against Texas. We get to see how everything continues to play on out. Looking at the top 3 group of 5 teams, Tyler, I don't know if anything's changed in mine. I've still got Boise State number 1. The fighting Ashton Genties, they just keep on rumbling over people. Had a bit of a tough game against Hawaii. It seems like sometimes teams just go out there and think they're going to have fun, and then Hawaii surprises them with, I don't know, a 7-minute drive that nearly went somewhere but then didn't, and that just takes up half your third quarter. Boise State, no one really saw it, thankfully for them, because it was late night on CBS Sports Network. But Boise State taking care of business once again. They stay number 1. UNLV stays number 2. Just a fantastic offense. Yes, the Spencer Petras was able to throw for over 350, I think over 400 yards against UNLV. So a little concerning for the Rebels defensively, but still got the job done, winning the shootout there. And then number 3, because I still love America and I respect our troops, Army 6-0 for the first time since 1996. Army's now number 1 in America in offensive efficiency, Tyler. They've done it. And you know why? Because they're the best rushing attack in America. 370 yards on the ground every single game, still only allowing about 10 points per game. That is number 2 in the country when it comes to points allowed. Army firing on all cylinders right now. And then number 4, because I want to throw them in there as well, Navy. Navy's also undefeated. They're 5-0, second best rushing offense in the country behind Army. Army and Navy staying undefeated, Tyler. It's going to get weird. It's going to get weird if they keep winning.
Yeah, and I actually am throwing out UNLV. I think the defense has shown, and the reason I do this is a bit preemptive because we've talked about it. UNLV Boise State still have a matchup to come. I don't see how the UNLV defense slows down Ashton Genty. If you've seen Twitter, you've seen the Michael Myers memes for Genty with his running back stance. Play the music because he's doing that to this UNLV defense. Closer we get to that game, the music gets louder, and he's about to go in for the kill. That might be a 250-yard performance for Genty in that game. And so I've still got Boise State number 1, but then I'll go Army and Navy because that's another one where they'll clash, and I think the winner of that is in prime position potentially to scoop up the benefit of should Boise State fall somewhere along the lines. Um, Obviously, both of them still have a big matchup with Notre Dame to come, but I think we could agree that wouldn't really hurt them if they lose as long as it's not a you know just absolute blowout. So give me Boise State 1, Navy 2, or excuse me, Army 2, Bryson Daly, West Texas quarterback, baby, getting it done. And then give me Navy number 3. I feel those 3, at least at this point of the season, have earned that. If you want to toss in number 4, I guess we can still go with UNLV, but I do think Liberty will start to get a little bit more pub in the later part of the season just because their schedule's so weak. They're going to be potentially, at 11-0, 12-0, and in an immediate spot to where should Boise State fall, should Army, Navy tailor off a little bit, you're going to look around and say, okay, well, who's still there? Liberty might be that perfect team just because, again, schedule not really good.
Yeah, and I can see your point there. Liberty, it's one of those, I want to hold off on them as long as I possibly can because of that weak schedule, like you mentioned. I might see, maybe Sam Houston finally gets around them in the last week of the season when they play Liberty. We'll have to see what
Right.
goes on there, but their overtime win they had against FIU did not impress me a whole lot, so they stay down for now. But looking at Heisman top 3, it changes a little bit. The front runner's not going to change for me. And unless something drastically happens, it's still Ashton Genty. 31 carries for 217 and a touchdown. Had a receiving TD as well against Hawaii. He's still the guy in college football right now. Number 2, I'm going to put Dylan Gabriel in there. He had his Heisman moment, so to speak. 23 for 30 or 23 for 34, 341 through the air, 2 passing touchdowns, a rushing TD as well, 32 yards there. A beautiful read option by him, faking out the entire Ohio State defense, making one man miss. That's all he had to do there. That helped Oregon put the game away. And then Cam Ward, I'll put him at 3. I'll knock Travis Hunter out for now. So that's not really his fault, though. He got dinged up a little bit against K-State. But unfortunately, things like that happen. I'll put Cam Ward at number 3 for right now. Miami didn't do anything last week, so Miami getting the benefit of that. They're still having Ward in my Heisman in top 3.
Okay, we'll go a little bit more of a disagreement here. I'll go Ashton Genty, of course, number 1. Number 2, I could slide Gabriel up there. I think that's deserved, for that big performance. Number 3, new name, guy that took a lot of flack after their opening week loss, but has since been absolutely lights out since then. Give me Cade Klubnik. This Clemson team's
Okay.
5-1. People were touting the death of Clemson and Dabo Swinney. But Cade, since that loss against Georgia, um, you murder Appalachian State, put 59 on NC State, you destroy Stanford, you do what you need to do against Florida State, and you just absolutely dominate Wake Forest this week. And the rest of their schedule, again, opportunities where really the only, at least right now, the game where it's that might be trouble is that Pitt game. They got to go to Pitt November 16th, but otherwise, Louisville, who's kind of fallen off. Virginia Tech, who we know is wildly inconsistent. The Citadel, you could have, some gaudy numbers in that game. And then South Carolina to end the season. Depending on what South Carolina does going forward, that could be a little bit of a tougher game. But Clemson could be staring at a 11-1 regular season with their only loss to Georgia. And unless Georgia completely just falls apart the rest of the way, the Tigers might get a little bit more pub in the coming weeks. And again, Cade Klubnik has just been fantastic. So get me Cade to sneak up there as a potential Heisman candidate.
Yeah, he's definitely on the list. I don't know why, but in the back of my mind, when you first said we were going to disagree a lot, I was half expecting number 3 to be like a meme answer, or maybe you're just going to try to slip Diego Pavia in there because he's just that guy. I was kind of half expecting
Yeah,
that, but
yeah.
Kate Klubnik, I think that's a good choice. I think he's got to be in the mix. I liked what you said there. Clemson, I mean, they're number 10, but you kind of don't think about them. Some of that is, we already saw them against Georgia, like you mentioned. Everyone wrote them off. They're just silently beating people up. And we haven't really talked about them a whole lot on the show. That's why they're silently beating people up, waiting to strike whenever the big moment arrives. But now, Tyler, it is finally time to get to the best of the rest, and we'll talk about that Iowa State West Virginia game. You mentioned Iowa State, you liked them a lot. Cyclones going into Morgantown, mentioned it's a weird place to play at, especially when you get late at night in the land of the couch burners. You never know what's going to happen there. West Virginia came out well, started out long drive, wanted to play a physical game. That's what the Mountaineers wanted to do. They got it going. But then Iowa State just slowly started to smother West Virginia. And it's weird to think about that because it's a 14-10 game. West Virginia's nearing the red zone late in the third quarter. Garrett Green throws an interception. Iowa State scores, 5-minute drive. Garrett Green throws another interception. Iowa State scores, 6-minute, 43-second drive. And the game's over just like that. West Virginia, like you mentioned, the garbage time score, that didn't mean anything. And this win probability chart that ESPN's got here kind of tells you the story of it, where it's just, okay, West Virginia's going to do something here. And then Iowa State slowly takes over, and then the big jump when they got the 11-point lead. You never really felt like Iowa State was going to fully lose the game once they took the lead because of how strong their defense is. You get concerned for a moment, and then after the interception, the concern goes away.
Yeah, and that's the thing. That's kind of been the theme we've talked about. Iowa State seemingly has done a really good job so far this season of always being in control. There hasn't been a game where you really felt like, other than the Iowa game early in the year where there was a lot of touch and go moments. Other than that, they've since been very methodical and just went about their business. Quality opponents have been fantastic, obviously, against Arkansas State, Houston, Baylor, and West Virginia. But that doesn't matter because you win. And, they'll have their test coming. Still got UCF, which might not be the biggest challenge, but Texas Tech at the moment is undefeated in conference play. You get them November 2nd. At Kansas, I will contend, is still at least a game you got to get up for. I know the wheels have fallen off, it seems like, for the Jayhawks, but late season, they're going to be playing for pride, so you got to watch out for that one. And at the end of the season, you circle that Kansas State game that by the week becomes more and more a potential play in to the Big 12 championship game. So um, I would definitely say that Iowa State has done everything you had asked of them to start the season. And now where do they go from here, Cade? That's a big question. Rocktobeck, sophomore quarterback, a lot of it's on his shoulders. Not to necessarily be leading the offense, but to be Brock Purdy like. Be efficient, lead your squad, don't make silly mistakes, and the rest will take care of itself.
Well, dare I say in that part, he might already be better than Brock Purdy because he hasn't had the annual "what am I doing" pass of the game that never made any sense whatsoever. I hope I didn't just jinx it with saying that. I do enjoy watching Rocco Beck play. I don't mean that as a curse, but sometimes that does happen when I say things. Occasionally it does. But Iowa State, like the story mentioning here, reading about, this is their best start since 1938. Iowa
Yeah,
State does not do this often. They don't
sure.
have consistency like this often. I think this is what Matt Campbell's been building to for a long time. That when you have consistency at a place like this, really at any place in America, I truly do believe this. If you get a coaching staff that commits to the program and gets, donors to buy and gets the community to buy and gets everyone invested, which Iowa State already had a lot of that support. They just needed the guy to unlock it. Stuff like this is possible. We saw it at Kansas State with Bill Snyder. We've seen it at Oklahoma State with Mike Gundy. You can win at a place like Iowa State, something that no one really thought was possible a decade or two ago, and we're seeing it happen right in front of our very eyes.
Yeah, credit to Matt Campbell, another guy that, along with Dabo, people were kind of writing off, right? That, oh, okay, his time has come and gone. He should have went to the NFL when the interest was there, and has done a good job to just, like you said, kind of build it back up and get them out of some rough spots. So credit to him.
Yeah, and we've got to stay in the Big 12, Tyler, because now we get to talk about the game you've already mentioned a whole lot about. We're not going to go into it too much. We've already mostly said our piece here. But Arizona State, that big 27-19 win over Utah, I think we've talked about it a lot on the negative side from Utah. Let's flip it. Let's go to what Arizona State did well. Cam Skattebo. That's really all I need to say is just Cam Skattebo and just keep repeating that until you get the point. 22 carries, 158, 2 touchdowns, does just about everything you'd want him to. We can keep saying that every single week we talk about Arizona State. But I think what got me the most was watching the end of this game. You see the Arizona State fans storm the field. You see Kenny Dillingham. He's doing his post-game interview. And he mentions this, and you forget about it. You think how young he is. He's one of the youngest coaches in the FBS. He's only in his mid-30s. And he's talking about, I was one of these kids that stormed the field. I was one of these kids a little over a decade ago that did stuff like this. And he goes and joins them and gets absorbed into the crowd. It just sinks back into it and just lets the moment overtake him. Arizona State's 5-1. And I don't think either of us saw what Arizona State was doing. We knew the potential was there if they could get a few breaks. They've already gotten them. They don't need maybe they're playing out for bowl eligibility late in the year. This Arizona State team has gotten better than I think we all thought it maybe could have been. Arizona State has gelled a lot more. Kenny Dillingham, he's another one of those coaches I really like, where he is just not afraid to just be aggressive with it. He's not afraid to try something new on the fly. He's one of those guys that just finds a way to win. I think he can be one of those program builder type of guys. He clearly loves Arizona State. You've got to be able to love where you're at. He went to school there. He's coaching there. He is fully bought in, kind of like we talked about with Matt Campbell. Arizona State, as long as he stays there, they might become a force in the Big 12. And for a while, they might be able to be a playoff contender one day, Tyler. I know that might be way down the line, but I think he's one of those guys you really do believe him when he says he can accomplish these things.
Hey, I don't know if it's down the line because you look at that schedule. Yeah, they lost to Texas Tech. That's one loss to start conference play. But Texas Tech has got some big challenges left. You still got a shot at BYU and Kansas State down the road. So Arizona State's destiny is in their own hands, and it might be sooner than we expect. And maybe we get the great storyline late season of, hey, Cam Skattebo leading the way for what was supposed to be a very, average to below average Arizona State team. That'd be a fun storyline down the stretch of the season. And for Dillingham, you mentioned that he's aggressive, he's not afraid. They find a way to win. That's been the big story. Outside their season opener against Wyoming and Cade, they've either won by a score or lost by one score. The Texas Tech loss was 8. Everything else has been by 8 or less in terms of the wins. So that's a little maybe too close on the wild side for an Arizona State fan. You might want to check your blood pressure, get that yearly visit to your doctor in case. But at the same time, it's a team that you can at least say, hey, when the chips are down or when you need those big momentum plays, they've been able to do that, and that does count for something, especially as you get late into the season and you're in the middle of a potential race to be in the conference championship game.
Absolutely, because this Big 12 race is topsy-turvy. I mean, anything can happen in the Big 12. It is the most chaotic conference in football. It's probably the most entertaining as well. Chaos and entertainment usually go hand in hand, and that continues when we talk about Kansas State going out to Colorado, an old Big 8 matchup being renewed here. And I think the win probability chart tells you everything you really need to know about this game. Kansas State looks like they're not comfortably going to put this away, I guess I should say is the best word of it, but they look like they're going to hold on and win. And then in the blink of an eye, they're down 28-24 with 3 minutes left. Colorado, a team that literally could not run the ball. And I mean literally, as in Shedeur Sanders has 9 carries for negative 50 yards. Kansas State's defense was
Got
able to,
sacked 6 times.
yeah,
Yeah.
got sacked 6 times, was just able to wail on him. Colorado finished with negative rushing yards and still at 359 total yards. That tells you everything, that Colorado was able to air it out a bit. Each team had a turnover. Kansas State was able to control the clock 35-25 in terms of minutes. And when Kansas State finally got pinned in a situation, it only took 3 plays and 51 seconds. K-State was able to respond. And Tyler, I knew we talked about this on the preview show, that it felt like this had the potential to go south for Kansas State. But I think they already had that experience. They've grown. Avery Johnson's grown up a lot from when we saw him struggling out in Provo, to go back out west and kind of get put in the same situation, a lot less worse than being down 29, obviously. But having that ability to put a game-winning drive together and to do it really shows the progression of this K-State team already through the year.
Yeah, and I will say this: in the loss for Colorado, man, if there's a game so far in his college career where you want to point to, hey, Shadur is actually can be a legit NFL quarterback, and it was lost, but give me this game. I mean, this dude's top options, Travis Hunter, Jimmy Horn, were down late in that game. In terms of not 100% out, and he was still getting it done and was really dotting up some big time throws and making some really good decisions. Wasn't enough in the end. The pressure a bit too much, obviously, with that Kansas State defense, but credit to him for being able to continue to fight when it looked like Kansas State, as you mentioned, kind of put this one away. So I do want to say that about Shadur and give him that credit. But yeah, big win for Kansas State in terms of the maturity factor for and Avery Johnson, right? Um, did enough to help them win the game and made those big plays. And I disagreed with you a couple weeks earlier, but I'm starting to get on the train. I do think DJ Giddings might be the best back in the Big 12. I mean, this dude is phenomenal. Continues to just every time you need, those yards, those consistent early down yards, and even later down yards, he gets it done. I mean, and he is so tough to deal with, really stout back. So, yeah, really like where Kansas State's starting to go. And this is the team we thought we might see, earlier in the season. So can they continue that momentum? That's why I'm curious, because they've got, as I mentioned a little bit, still got some good tests left. Arizona State late in the schedule, November 19th coming to you, and that game against Iowa State. So could they ride that momentum? On the outside looking in right now for the Big 12 title game, but have an opportunity to correct that going forward.
Absolutely. And it's going to be a lot of fun to see. And that's the thing with doing best of the rest. There are going to be some weeks on this show where it just turns into covering the Big 12. That's just how weird this conference is. This was one of those weeks where just every game seemed to deliver in some way or fashion. It was good to see K-State and Colorado also play each other again. I mean, we talk about conference realignment a lot, where it drives games like this apart. It was good to see one of those few instances where it comes back together. I'm glad you're finally on the DJ Giddens train. Welcome aboard to seeing one of the best running backs in the country. Definitely, I think the best in the Big 12 for now. But that can change at any point in time again. But just how Kansas State is able to conduct themselves, this is the K-State I think everyone expects to see. And I think you hit on that point. This is who they're going to be going forward. They needed a game to get right. That was that BYU game. And for K-State, that loss looks better every single week. BYU continues to win. They hammered Arizona. That's not a bad loss by any means for Kansas State. But Tyler, we officially have to jump out of the Big 12 now and have to talk about, Purdue and Illinois. Purdue's fired Graham Harrell, their offensive coordinator, already. Surely Illinois will be able to take advantage of this, and they're up 27-3 in the third quarter. And then whatever switch flipped in Purdue, I don't know what they did to turn this game upside down, but they were absolutely able to go off. And this turned into the wildest shootout of the year, maybe? I think so. 99 combined points in this one. Illinois gets to win 50-49. I don't think I would have ever seen someone be so excited to storm the field for beating 1-5 Purdue, but it happened in Champaign. Illinois able to hold on for dear life to get to 5-1 on the season. And Tyler, I mean, you want to talk about the most unexpected game. I did not have Illinois blows a 24-point lead, but still wins and scores 50 on my bingo card this week. If you were to tell me, pick one game that will probably be beat down of the week, or like your most guaranteed predict this will happen, I probably would have went with this game. And this is why you should never trust me to pick any game whatsoever.
Yeah. You know, I think that you wonder, okay, how's this happen, right? In terms of the being able to just blow this game back to being an absolute wild, crazy, thrilling end. Give credit to Ryan Brown, the redshirt freshman. What a game! I mean,
Absolutely.
he'd go for nearly 300 yards passing. He was electric on the ground. That helped them, really make some big time plays. Him and Devin McCoby just, doing a great job of that. They averaged nearly 7 yards a carry. Good God, no, over 7. I apologize. So, hey, for Illinois, you look at it and say, okay, we can't afford that later in the season, right? Luke Altmaier, we talked about him before on the show, showing that hey, I can bring something to this offense, and he did it again in this game. Was able to show a bit of that arm talent, but man, that was I don't want to say trap game because you're at home, but maybe Illinois was looking a little forward to welcoming Michigan into town this week, and then you got to go to Eugene after that. So maybe they got caught up in a little bit of that and said, "Oh, hey, we've got our lead. We're good." I just what a wild sequence. Probably the best game that not a lot of people saw, without question, not only of Saturday but maybe of the season.
Yeah, I was going to say, Tyler, it was crazy to think going into today, as we were recording this, Purdue is a 2-point conversion away from being champion of life of the week. After all the craziness that happened this week, Purdue nearly got that award for being 2-4. But hey, I will say, and we'll talk about this a lot more when we get to the preview, Oregon now comes to Purdue on Friday
Uh huh.
night. You know what weird things happen on Friday nights this year? Spoiler makers, they might be back. If they can keep doing this, why not Purdue? That's all I'm saying.
It,
27
it
and a half point
surprise,
underdogs. Why not Purdue?
and no surprise, Brown, of course, named starter earlier today for that Oregon game. So hey, the redshirt freshman. He doesn't know any better, Kate. He doesn't know any better. He doesn't know that he's not supposed to give number 2 Oregon fit. So I'm kind of with you. That might be an interesting one to keep a watch on just in case to see what happens, because who knows? Maybe Oregon has a little bit of a hangover after that big win against Ohio State.
Absolutely. Sometimes you've got to be taught how to fear a team. And that's why freshmen sometimes are the best to just, here you go, throw them in the situation. You'll figure it out. You don't know what you're doing yet. And if the other team doesn't know what you're doing because you don't know what you're doing, that can sometimes work to your advantage, Tyler. Sometimes
Yeah.
misdirection is the correct play. But either way, folks, that will wrap this one up for the Week 7 recap. Just another fun week in college football as usual. As always, feel free to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, and leave a comment down below. We truly do appreciate it. It doesn't sound like a lot, and it really isn't, but it does mean a lot to us to help us continue to grow the channel. I like to see, we're at 85 subscribers now. Most people who watch these videos, over 85 to 90% of them aren't subscribed to the channel. So if you want to help us slowly get to that 100 goal and beyond, keep growing it, spread the word, tell your friends, tell your coworkers, tell your family, tell anyone that'll listen. If you love college football, this is one of the places to come to. But folks, until next time, have a good one, everybody.